Well, welcome to the 700 Club. The war in Gaza is raging again. Hamas fired rockets at Israel's territory, breaking the ceasefire. The renewed fighting puts the release of more hostages on hold.
140 are still held captive, and it's uncertain when or if negotiations for their release will restart. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
Early Friday morning, the IDF resumed bombing in Gaza City after it announced Hamas began firing rockets into southern Israel, breaking the 7-day ceasefire. During that week, more than 100 hostages were freed from Gaza. On Thursday, Hamas released 10 more Israeli hostages. Israel wanted to see all women and children set free. But as the fighting begins again, the negotiations are on hold, and the fate of the nearly 140 hostages still in captivity is uncertain. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken left Friday morning after a day of meetings with Israeli and Palestinian leaders. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Blinken Israel's goals for the war have not changed.
I told him, this is the same Hamas. This is the same Hamas that carried out the terrible massacre on October 7th. The same Hamas that tries to murder us everywhere. I told him, we swore, and I swore, to eliminate Hamas. Nothing will stop us. We will continue this war until we achieve the 3 goals: to release all our abductees, to eliminate Hamas completely, and to ensure that Gaza will never again face such a threat.
Blinken repeated the administration message that there should be less civilian deaths and displacement in operations in southern Gaza. And Israel's Channel 12 is reporting Blinken gave Israel weeks to finish the job of destroying Hamas. Today, the New York Times reports Israeli intelligence knew about Hamas's plan to attack southern Israel more than a year in advance, but did not believe the terror group had the capability or the will to carry it out. The intelligence document reportedly described the plan in detail, which Hamas carried out on October 7th. Meanwhile, Palestinians in the West Bank celebrated the release of more than 200 prisoners during the ceasefire. Most of those set free were convicted of terrorism, including attempted murder, stabbings, and bombings. Palestinian Media Watch announced the Palestinian Authority will be paying thousands of shekels to a number of these convicted terrorists. The PA has a long history of glorifying terrorists and martyrs by naming schools and public places after terrorists like Dulal Mughrabi, convicted of one of the worst terror attacks in Israel's history, and the infamous refrigerator bomber. He filled a refrigerator with explosives that killed 15 people and was called a Palestinian symbol. Support for the PA's rival Hamas has increased substantially because of the war in Gaza. As a result, the PA has praised what Hamas did on October 7th. Despite this, U.S. Secretary Blinken sees the PA as a peace partner after the war.
We've said, and indeed I had an opportunity to discuss today with President Abbas, the need for reform, the need to revitalize, to revamp the Palestinian Authority so that it can most effectively meet the aspirations of the Palestinian people and deliver for them.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Go into that.
Well, Itamar Marcus is the director of Palestinian Media Watch. He joins us now from just outside Jerusalem. So you monitor Palestinian media. So the U.S. Secretary of State, he said he wants to effectively meet the aspirations of them. So what exactly is he talking about? What does he mean by that?
Well, he means one thing, and the Palestinian Authority means something, understands it completely differently. He's talking about having a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. When the Palestinians talk about their aspirations, the Palestinian Authority, not just Palestinians, they are talking about the elimination of Israel. We have seen this countless times in their school books. The hundreds of maps throughout their education system don't have Israel on the map. We've heard even during the last few weeks repeatedly. We heard from Mahmoud Abbas's advisor, for example. He said that the existence of Israel for over 7 decades is the cause of conflict, and there will only be peace in the region once Israel's occupation ends, meaning once there's no Israel. So the Palestinian Authority, to their own people, make it very clear their aspirations are the end of Israel.
Oh, well, explain to me why both the State Department, the CIA, the European Union, and the UN all seem to cling to some kind of hope that there could be a two-state solution, that there could actually be peace. It looks like they're just turning a blind eye to what the Palestinians are actually saying.
Absolutely. They have their ideology, and basically they're saying, this is what I believe, and don't confuse me with the facts. I tell people when I travel to parliaments and to Congress, I say, don't tell the Palestinians what they believe. Listen to what they say they believe. And they are absolutely emphatic about this. And it's not just the Palestinian leadership and their messages. A poll that came out just now, 2 weeks ago. So this is since the terrible atrocities and during the war, 75% of Palestinians say they want one state of Palestine to replace all of Israel from the river to the sea. And only 10% said they wanted a two-state solution. So the Palestinian leadership say it, the Palestinian population says it. Any creation of a two-state solution would be seen by the Palestinian and the leadership as a temporary, I would say, respite in order to launch what they would say is the final war against Israel. I'll even say one more statement about this. Abbas Zaki is a senior Palestinian official very close to Mahmoud Abbas. He said once on TV, we tell the world that we want the 67 borders, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but everyone knows that the real plan is all of Palestine, erasing Israel. And then he said, but everyone knows Israel can't survive those borders. Israel can't survive those 67 borders. Everyone knows this, he said. Therefore, that's what we're looking for. And that's what Blinken is talking about. When he says Palestinian aspirations, he wants us to go to those borders that the Palestinians say they know Israel cannot survive.
You're getting ready to testify before the UN Human Rights Council. What's your message to them?
My message to them is that the problem is not just Hamas. The problem is the Palestinian Authority. In fact, I go even further. It was the Palestinian Authority that inadvertently created the power of Hamas. We have been reporting for years, for decades, on the Palestinian Authority education. We've done reports on their school books, on their summer camps, on all of their social media, every message that they give to children through every which way. And what happens is these children are growing up with hatred. They're growing up with the religious beliefs that Allah wants them to fight and kill Jews and destroy Israel. This is what they're growing up with. So when they reach 17, 18, 19 years old, they say, hey, wait a second. Everything I've learned in all my schooling and all my education tells me that I should be joining Hamas. So it was the PA that created Hamas. If the PA continues to rule, we will have more and more organizations and terrorists like Hamas. They might have different names. If Hamas is made illegal, they'll have another name. But PA education leads to Hamas ideology.
The President Biden said in his first year in office that he was looking forward to a two-state solution, that Israel should return to the 67 borders. He then reinstituted funding for UNRWA, the UN Relief Works Agency. It just seemed to be a grand reset. That is he just holding on to some kind of fiction that there actually could be a two-state solution?
It is definitely a fiction, and I think fortunately most Israelis now recognize that it's not reasonable. It's a recipe for death and destruction for Israelis. We have a Hamas state in Gaza, which is far away from the majority of Israel's population centers, business centers, Tel Aviv. And even so, we have now around 300,000 people who are refugees in Israel, had to leave their homes because of the 10,000 or so missiles that Hamas has fired. Most of them caused little damage. Well, now imagine a Hamas state in Judea and Samaria, West Bank. We're not talking about missiles going into mostly desert Negev. We're talking about missiles being launched from 7 kilometers away from Tel Aviv. And the majority of our population, we're talking about missiles being launched 3 kilometers or 2 kilometers away from Jerusalem. We're talking about missiles being launched 5 kilometers from the airport. So Israel would be under siege 24/7 if there were ever a Palestinian state. And don't anyone believe it will be a peaceful state. There is nothing to indicate it would be any different than the Hamas is in Gaza.
Well, what do you think the solution is here? It just seems to be continuous frustration. And I like to point out to people, every time an Arab leader comes to peace with Israel, they're assassinated. Anwar Sadat assassinated for the Camp David Accords, going all the way back to 1948, where the King of Jordan was assassinated right outside Al-Aqsa. You look at this situation, is there any hope for peace? And if there is, what's the path to it?
Well, we at Palestinian Media Watch have been working with Palestinians who do want peace. They're not in any position of power, but there are individuals who recognize that Israel is much, much friendlier to them and cares about their welfare much more than their own leadership does. When I say working with us, we've had translators who are Palestinians, and we even have had Palestinians meet together with me with members of different parliaments who've come from Europe. And they've told them exactly what life is like under the Palestinian Authority, and they would much rather have some kind of Israeli rule or Israeli partnership, because Israel cares about the Palestinian people much more than their own leadership does. So there are Palestinians. Now, there are Palestinians who also run their families, that are family leaders, community leaders, the mukhtars of the villages. These are the people who care about their people. The Palestinian Authority political leadership are corrupt, don't care anything about the Palestinian population. And essentially what I see having to happen is the entire Palestinian Authority leadership has to be replaced. Not just replaced. I mean, they've all committed crimes against Israel. They could all be literally in jail for inciting murder, every one of them. And they have to be replaced by a new parliament. Now, Israel can't do this. We need the United States. We need the Europeans. They have to come in. This is what I see the model in Gaza. There'll be no leadership in Gaza. I see the model in Gaza of the Israel having entire security control and the United States and Europe together creating education, social structures, culture, sports, rebuilding it under completely different values without the PA being involved in the education. This will, and then that could be the model for Judea and Samaria as well.
All right. Well, I'll pray that comes to pass. We need peace there, and we need it now. Itamar Marcus, thanks for all that you do. Thanks for monitoring all the Palestinian communications. And please continue to get this message of peace out to the world. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Terry, what's next?
Well, I have a quick question for you. I'm watching all of this as just an average American who loves Israel, but how do we say Hamas must be destroyed, and then we agree to a transfer of 3 of their people for 1 of Israel's people? And last week they said one of the people transferred was one of the leaders of Hamas. I mean, what's the thought process behind that?
Well, it's the value that Israelis put on life, and in the Jewish tradition, if you save 1 life, it's like you're saving the entire world. So the current leader of Hamas was released years ago. He spent 20 years in Israeli jail for killing 4 Palestinians. And the reason he killed them is they were collaborators with Israel. They wanted peace. And so he killed them, he murdered them, and he went to jail. He was released 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, and he was one of the 1,000, was released in exchange for 1 Israeli soldier who was kidnapped and taken to Gaza. So it's been a long-standing principle in Israel. We want to do everything we can to save life.
I respect that. It's just hard to see where the end game in that lands.
Well, it's hard for me to see the end game just because of the incredible doublespeak that somehow Israel is a colonizer, that it's some kind of European power that drove the Arabs out of their land. and that, you know, it's an apartheid state. And I'm going, are you kidding? All of that ignores clear facts on the ground. You go back to 1948 and huge populations of Jews in Egypt and Iraq and Syria and Iran and Morocco. And after the formation of the State of Israel, it became illegal in those countries to be Jewish. They were all expelled and forced to become refugees. Where did they go? They went to Israel, and they prospered there. The Arabs continually ignore. They were the ones that told fellow Arabs to leave Israel, that they were getting ready to attack. So it's this doublespeak. Yeah. And if you're Jewish, the Jewish population of Gaza is 0, because if you live there, you're going to be killed. Yeah. There's signs up in Ramallah. There's signs up in the West Bank. If you're an Israeli citizen, don't cross this border. We can't protect you anymore. Yeah. Your life is at risk. So you look at, well, there's an Arab population in Israel, but there's no Jewish population in the Palestinian-controlled. Who's the apartheid state?
Yes, yes.
You know, who is the excluder? And it's just amazing to me that this anti-Israel, and I've got to call it for how I see it, anti-Semitic ideology seems to be taking over the whole world. Yeah. And we, as Christians, please stand against it, and please get educated on the history, so that when you hear these slogans from the river to the sea, when you hear apartheid, where you hear colonizer, where you hear all of these slogans being repeated and repeated, you're able to stand up and say, no, that's not the history. Those aren't the facts on the ground. This is not real. This is pure ideological propaganda. It's made up, and it's trying to revise history to fit a particular narrative, and that narrative is the destruction of the Jews. Please stand against it. Please let your voice be heard. We need it now more than ever.